1.6 billion people, some of the world's poorest, depend on forest for their daily survival. The forest is their larder, their pharmacy, building materials, fuel depot, and food for their animals. Forests are a barrier against erosion, landslides, and avalanches. They keep rivers clean and slow the speed of the water during the monsoon or spring thaw, protecting against floods and the impact of climate change. And forests are carbon sinks, absorbing as much as a fifth of all carbon emissions caused by fossil fuels. But the world is losing forest areas the size of Greece every year. Illegal logging is part of the problem. The loggers buy off local chiefs or politicians and start clearing the forest. Other threats include legal but unsustainable logging, plantations for palm oil or soybeans or farming. The people that used to live in the forests rarely get to share the profits. Sometimes authorities try to solve the problem by fencing off the forest, forbidding people to use it. But that leaves the poorest with nothing. They lose their homes, food, fodder, and fuel. But we can prevent deforestation and bring back the forests. The key is the local communities. Several studies show that when a forest community is given the right to manage the forest and the knowledge of how to preserve it and to make a living from it at the same time, both forests and communities thrive. This can only work if authorities, local, national, and international, recognize the rights of the communities and pass laws that ensure that everybody should have their say and their share. In a growing number of countries, this is already working. Hillsides that were barren are now green again. Local people have learned how to manage the forest, and at the same time, old patterns are changing. In communities where women, ethnic minorities, and the most marginalized people did not have a say, they are now aware of their rights and they voice their opinion. By giving rights to the poorest, we benefit all.
Danish, huh? All right. All right, welcome to A Growing Concern. Well, that little clip obviously was probably directed more for other countries who don't have any say at all in what is going on in their forest. They have the illegal logging. The forests are impossible for folks to go visit those forests. But like they say, the community has a right to have a say in what is going on in the natural resources, and we're lucky in this country. We have the National Environmental Policy Act, which mandates that any timber sales or anything that's going on in the Bureau of Land Management, which is what, Department of the Interior, and Forest Service, which is Department of Agriculture, any timber sales they have, public has a say, and they're always try to get around that with category exclusions and different things that they do. I know they did that during the Bush era a lot, but we have the ability to do that, and I don't think the American people take advantage of that. Maybe they don't know enough about it. But since they don't know enough about it, quite possible, we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, and we're going to use Mountain Hood National Forest as kind of like the linchpin for the whole thing, to let folks know, sure, what a lot of the things that was being said in that they have, that the things forests do for us, and you maybe even know that we have a right to be involved in it. But we're going to find out a little bit tonight from Meredith Cox, who works with BARC. And we're going to talk specifically about Mountain Hood, and even more specifically about the Jazz Timber Sale. So Meredith, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks, Jim.
And you've been with BARC for a while now, a year or two?
Going on 2 years.
All right, and what is it you do with BARC?
I am the grassroots organizer,
which is the heart of BARC. It's grassroots organizing.
Yeah, and we. So yeah, the heart of the work that BARC does is really to get the public involved in the management process and just getting out into the forest and helping understand and shape what happens out there. And Mount Hood National Forest is where we specifically focus, and that is about 1 million acres surrounding Mount Hood, stretching up to the Columbia River, and then down south almost to Mount Jefferson, and that's where we focus our watchdog efforts. Mm-hmm.
And BARC has been, I was asked to join the board in 1998. I think it was 99, in February of 99. So BARC is coming up really close to 15 years now. And it started out with a lawyer and a musician who got involved, and they were just going up there and looking at the timber sales and finding out what they could do. And next thing you know, 15 years down the road, there's an organization that's what they do. Before we move on to what we're going to talk about jazz, was there anything that stuck out in that little 2-minute clip since you hadn't seen it yet?
I mean, it's always a great reminder of how lucky we are to have the opportunity to be involved in forest management and compared with the rest of the world. You know, we can go out and see what's happening on forests in Oregon and be really disheartened at times, but we really do have a lot of strength and say. And even over the years since BARC has started, we've moved from a situation where old-growth clear cuts were commonplace on Mount Hood to a time now where, you know, we are feeling like we could start working with the Forest Service to make real restoration happen on the mountain. So, yeah, it's good to have that perspective and encouraging in that way.
Mm-hmm. And it's encouraging to know that they're not clear cutting.
Yeah.
Although, you know, there's, like I say, that they tend to get around things. They can cut half of it now and then half of it in 20 years, a slow motion clear cut. And there's still issues. And one of the things that stuck out in my mind was the fact that they do a lot of illegal logging in other countries. And you know, illegal is kind of a catchphrase. I mean, it's a matter of perspective. It can be subjective because, you know, what is going on with BARC right now is last week there was the Forest Service decided to allow some units of the Jazz timber sale to be cut, even though it's past the normal season, it's into the rain. Now, you know, they make the rules and then they break them to suit themselves. To me, that's illegal, even though it isn't.
Right.
So it's pretty subjective.
Sure, and then on the other hand too, you know, we're challenging the Jazz timber sale in court right now, so we are questioning the legality of this timber sale, and they gave special permission for logging to occur, knowing full well that the legality of the sale is in question and has yet to go before a judge. So it is something that could be deemed illegal, you know, and it's yet to be seen. So there is, you know, question of whether or not it is a legal sale in the moment.
It's what the judge says, I guess, is
Yeah.
what it gets down to. So I know we're going to have a video of the rally that BARC put together in like 24 hours. We're going to listen to that in a little while, which will give you some background on BARC, especially from Brenna, who's talking a lot about they're trying to tout this as reforestation. But what are some of the specifics about the Jazz timber sale that made BARC jump on board and put in, what, 800 hours of volunteer work?
I think it was 600 in the field, of course, not counting all the
That's
in
a
the
lot
office.
of field work.
All the hours we put in last week at the office overtime. Probably added another couple hundred. So Jazz has been around for a few years. It was actually proposed back in 2010, and the Forest Service released what they call scoping notice, and proposing a 2,000-acre thinning project throughout the Kallawash watershed. And the Kallawash it's kind of in the area of the Bagby Hot Springs. It is a tributary of the Clackamas River. And so what BARC does, as you know, Jim, is gets out into the forest and ground truths proposed timber sales. We get volunteers to get boots on the ground and walk the length of the units and kind of see what is going on. And what we found out there was that the description on paper that this is a timber sale that is a plantation, it was cut 50, 60, 70 years ago there and replanted, and it really needs the help of logging in order to be ecologically healthy and in order for the trees to grow more. But what we found out there was very different than that. First of all, that's one reason. We found a lot of places there where, you know, there was a lot of downed woody debris, a lot of healthy understory, just a lot of life in that area. And, you know, so we first questioned, does this forest need to be logged to be healthy? And but there are a lot of other things about the sale that are really concerning. I mean, the vast size of it, it's 2,000 acres, but that is spanning over, which is a big number. And then that is spread over 40 square miles of the forest.
And what, 175 units or something?
Right, lots of units. And that is a problem because, first of all, just the vast size of it means the impact on the watershed and just the overall impact on the forest is greater. And then you think of all the infrastructure that you need for logging. You need landings where logs are piled. You need roads to access them. You need to reopen roads that have been closed. or have been overgrown over time. And all that really adds up. And what we found in Jazz was that 2,000 acres of thinning, but actually, if you count all the infrastructure, the roads and the landings needed to get to every one of the 100 whatever units, you get over 111 acres of clear cuts from that infrastructure alone. So there's really a lot more to the story than just going in and removing trees. There is, heavy machinery has to get there to be able to get to all the units. And the other piece of the vast size is getting the public out there, and it took a lot to get people out to see all of the units in that timber sale. Like you said, 100, 600 hours on the ground we had out there to be able to see every unit and comment on it, which is really important to BARC's ability to tell the story of this timber sale. And then I guess another really big piece of Jazz is, which we will talk, or which folks will see in the video of the rally, so I won't get into it too much, but the watershed of the Kallawash is a very special place. It is considered the most geologically unstable area in the whole forest. And
in Mount Hood National Forest.
In Mount Hood National Forest, yeah. And it is a earth flow, which means basically the soil is like a moving glacier. It's alive, and if you go out there and see roads that lead into the Jazz timber sale, we have photos of people standing like waist deep in these holes in the road because the soil is moving underneath, the ground is moving, and the roads on top are sliding and falling around. So that is just to say that this is a place where the erosion from logging is going to be much, much more impactful, and 2,000 acres of it at that. And then to boot, there are a number of threatened salmon species that are reliant on that watershed, on the health and integrity of that watershed in order for the survival. There is the last wild late run of coho salmon in the Columbia Basin, located in the Kallawash watershed. So we are really concerned about the impacts of 2,000 acres of logging, of the sediment that would be delivered to streams, of the erosion from roads. And even the own environmental assessment of the Forest Service says that there would be, I think, 19 tons of sediment delivered into the watershed as a result of this logging project. So we question if it is really in the best interest of forest health, as the Forest Service is saying in this instance, for logging Jazz to occur, considering the unstable soil, the endangered fish, and the condition of the forest out there.
And it's been severely cut in the past too, but
Sure.
they never consider that the fact that the surrounding area has been cut.
Right, and it's definitely a landscape in recovery. It's not an old growth forest that has been cut before, which makes it kind of a more challenging fight in some ways, because people seem to think this isn't really, it's not valuable anymore. But if you go out there, you can see that it is a forest in recovery, and it's really making a great comeback. And a lot of the units are adjacent to old growth that has never been cut. So we're also concerned about what does it mean to create a lot of fragmented edges around old growth that is still intact, and what that means for the ecosystem of that forest as well.
I would think the biodiversity would be finding refuge in those smaller and smaller areas of old growth.
Right, yeah. And, we saw barred owls and great horned owls in the units adjacent, in the Jazz units adjacent to old growth, and they're a competitor with the spotted owl, who, in theory should be making home in those areas of old growth. So opening it up could really create the conditions for barred owls and great horned owls to start competing with the endangered spotted owl habitat.
And they're an invasive species, more or less, aren't they?
The barred owl, yeah, is my understanding.
People think of plants, but animals are
Sure.
that as well.
Yeah.
Well, so before we get into the video, which will take what's going on with Jazz, starting last week, what was it? 600 and some hours out in there, and then they decided what they wanted to do, and then BARC. Well, actually, I should back up. BARC, did their public involvement with it, and they ended up changing it a little bit, and then BARC. Then it went back and forth. What's some of that?
Right.
Back and forth there.
Yeah, there's quite a backstory. Like I said, it was proposed in 2010, and then they made their final decision actually in 2012. Let me consult my timeline
Sure.
because it is tough to remember all the dates. Right, so in September in 2010, they first introduced it, and we ground truthed and got all the data in. And then in September of 2012, because the Forest Service process is not quick, that is when they finally gave their environmental assessment and gave a finding of no significant impact. So that's the document that is required by the National Environmental Policy Act, where they analyze the impact of a project on the environment. And then they make a decision whether or not to allow the project to happen. And to be honest, I've never heard of a finding of significant impact. I've only heard of the agency issuing a finding of no significant impact. I'm not sure if it has ever happened.
Pretty much.
I'd like to look into that. But
So at that point, there's public involvement.
at that point, right. Well, there is public involvement prior to that, and then post-decision there is, we were involved by appealing that decision. We filed an appeal to their finding of no significant impact. And that was, late 2012. So what happened then was quite interesting. We received a one-page, one-sentence letter in the mail that said that the forest supervisor, a fellow named Chris Worth, had decided to withdraw his finding of no significant impact on the Jazz timber sale. Period. The end. There was no, this is why he did it. So we were kind of stunned because it doesn't happen very often. And we called victory. We said, this is great. We've stopped Jazz. We knew, of course, they were going to probably come back with a new version of it. But in that moment, it was a great moment to celebrate and say, hey, they clearly listened to something that we said. And, early in the winter, actually, the forest supervisor that made that decision ended up leaving Mount Hood. He no longer works for Mount Hood National Forest. And in spring, they gave a new Jazz timber sale, what we called Zombie Jazz.
Zombie Jazz, right.
And they revived the Jazz timber sale. But what they did was essentially reprint the same document with a few little fine-tunings to address the concerns that we had brought up. But there was really no substantive difference in their new environmental assessment on Jazz.
They didn't protect any stands or anything like that.
No, and really the reason why we believe they withdrew the sale in the first place was because they say this sale will not have an environmental impact of significance, and we think that is because we are going to be following these best management practices while we are logging that are a certain protocol to reduce erosion and really protect watershed health. And we had done work to monitor whether or not the Forest Service was following these BMPs, as they're called, and we had found that they were not routinely following the BMPs, and that there was evidence to suggest that the BMPs were not effective even when they were implemented. So that was the point that we really raised in our challenge to Jazz initially, and we think, although we cannot be sure, that is why they withdrew it. So all that is to say, when they reintroduced the Zombie Jazz, they basically just fine-tuned a little bit of the language around that, but there was no real difference at all. So we reappealed again. We reappealed, and we had an appeal resolution meeting where we came to the table with the new forest supervisor, and it was very clear that there was going to be no negotiation was going to happen that day, despite us being at the table together. So we filed a lawsuit in July of 2013, and that kind of brought us to where we are today. We filed the lawsuit, and we were just kind of going down the legal route. And then we discovered that logging had already begun.
So somewhere along that line, they had sold it, had the auction.
Oh, sure. That's another piece. They had auctioned it to a company called Inter4, and Inter4 is a Canadian-based logging company that operates on Mount Hood. They're a pretty large company, and they were the only company that actually placed a bid on the Jazz timber sale. Of course, it was actually the base and the drum. They broke the Jazz environmental assessment into smaller base, drum, and we just got the tuba timber sale proposed as well. Those are pieces of Jazz. They break them into smaller units. So Inter4 bid on base and drum. They were the only bidder, so they were awarded the contract. Mm-hmm. But despite our lawsuit, we chose not to file for an injunction that would potentially keep logging from happening until the lawsuit goes before a judge, because we said, well, it's already November and logging season ended on October 31st, so they're not going to log between now and when our case is heard. But we were wrong, and we were very surprised when we found out just last Tuesday that the Forest Service had given a special wet weather waiver to Interfor to begin logging, which we didn't. We knew it was a possibility, but we didn't think it was likely. We didn't think it would be really a fair play, and so we thought they probably wouldn't do it.
So that brings us right up to the video of the rally, I should say, that happened last week. And we'll go in there, and then that'll bring you up to date with what is going on now. Then we'll come back and continue with the conversation.
And the rivers that we all love in Mount Hood National Forest. We learned on Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock that the Forest Service had granted a special exemption to the Canadian-based logging company Interfor to log the Jazz timber sale outside of the normal seasonal restriction due to rain. On Tuesday afternoon, we learned of this. By Wednesday morning, BARC had volunteers in the forest to document the fact that at least one unit had been logged of the Jazz timber sale. The reason that there's a seasonal restriction is because the impacts to soil in our watershed from heavy logging equipment is increased significantly when it's rainy and wet. The quick turnaround of our volunteers in the forest and the great work of our staff attorney Brenna Bell and attorney David Becker, who I don't believe is here today, they were able to immediately get a emergency temporary restraining order issued to the court yesterday by 2 o'clock. And the good news is that we currently have a 2-week reprieve while the preliminary injunction is being heard. There's no logging. According to our activists who were in the forest this morning at 7 a.m., the logging is officially stopped. But that doesn't mean that our job is done, because the waiver is still in place. So the reason that we're here today is because the most efficient and the only correct thing for the Forest Service to do is the waiver so that they're not logging and increasing the impacts to the Clackamas River watershed. So that's what we're doing today. We want to make sure that the Forest Service hears one simple message, which is stop logging jazz! All right. So we're going to give this a try, and the first way we're going to do this is by calling Mike Chavis, the district ranger of the Clackamas River Ranger District, where the Jazz timber sale is occurring.
Hi Mike, this is Alex Brown at BARC. I'm actually downtown across the street from the regional office of the Forest Service. I'm here with a large group of Oregonians who care deeply about the Clackamas River, and we're concerned about the logging that's moving forward on the Jazz timber sale. Everyone here just wants to send you a quick message, and here it is.
Stop logging jazz! Stop logging jazz!
All right.
Stop logging jazz!
Appreciate your attention to this issue, and hopefully we'll be talking soon. Thank you.
Right!
That was so much fun. That was great work, everyone. We started with the district ranger. The next person is going to be the forest supervisor, and finally we're going to go to the regional forester who happens to actually be in this office. So that was a warm-up, and everyone did a great job. So now I'd like to have a very special volunteer come up and talk a little bit about what she recently saw in her trip up to the actual Jazz timber sale area.
I'm a canvasser for BARC, but I'm also a volunteer. And I've spent the last 2 years spending a lot of time in the Jazz timber sale, either mushroom hunting or hiking or camping or surveying. So I've gotten to know the area pretty well, and it's really beautiful. I suggest spending time there. But yeah, so I've also talked to a lot of people over the last 2 years about the 2,000 acres that they want to log, and about how it's restoration work. And so my love for the area is really why when I got a phone call from Michael at 6 o'clock the day before, I decided I'd go out at 6 a.m. and with 6 other volunteers so that we could go look at these units that we had gotten a lead that were being logged illegally. And so when we got there, excuse me, we started driving down the 6811. It's like a really old dirt road for logging from a long time ago, and we immediately noticed like really huge like track marks from what seemed like really heavy machinery. They'd even like cut trees along the sides of the road to get it all the way through. And so we went up this really muddy, gross road, and we knew that Inferior had their way. No, sorry, what is it? Interfer. Oh, I'm sorry. But we knew that they'd had their way because there were 50-year-old to 70-year-old trees just piled up all over, just waiting to make their way out of the forest in Unit 60 or 37. So there was just slash everywhere. All of the understory was completely compacted, bare soil everywhere. And then over all of it was just a thin stream of water just kind of washing everything away. Not to mention the famous northwest rain just drizzling the whole scene. It was really heartbreaking. Water is like a really clear indication that you shouldn't be logging in an area, and it's really obvious when you see it. It's just all washing away. Yeah, and so I just can't stop thinking about how absurd it is that the Forest Service calls this restoration. Especially as somebody that's been there before and has been there after. Like, this is anything but restoration. And it just nearly needs to stop. So, I wanted to give Lisa Northrup for a supervisor call. Oh yeah, here we go. Call her Rush.
See, I told you not everything was going to go right. We have photos.
There's photos. This is, yeah, as you can see, the puddles. Really great, right? No, it's not great. But, all right, so let's call Lisa Northrup. How about it? Okay, well, so I have a pretty large group of people here standing in front of, I think, your building. And, yeah. Okay, well, the regional office in Portland. And, we have a message for Lisa. And so, here it is.
Stop logging gas!
Now!
We've been busting our ass, and I'm so excited to see you all busting your ass to get down here. So thank you so much. It makes the hours of drudgery in front of the computer just slip away to stare out and see you all. So thank you. Okay, now there's one more thing I'm going to ask before I get into the spiel. Now I kind of want to be loud, because there's a lot of people in the federal building over there. This is a new headquarters for the Forest Service, by the way. What do you think? Yeah, right? It's not very friendly-like. I'm not sure if it's soundproof, but I think we should test it. We've got a message. We know our message. We're going to get into the exciting and more difficult chant later. But right now, I'd like us to just say, maybe they can hear if we say it enough times, like say 10, as loudly as we can to stop logging jazz. Okay, I'm going to bullhorn to them too. Okay, ready? Stop logging jazz! 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 As Audie was saying, the Forest Service is touting the jazz timber sale as a restoration project. I've got a couple of questions for you. Is rebuilding 12 miles of previously decommissioned roads restoration? No! Is taking over 300,000 trees from a recovering ecosystem that otherwise would die to become snags or large woody debris, which plantations desperately need to recover, is that restoration? No! Is adding at least 17 tons of sediment into a watershed that is a designated Tier 1 key watershed for a threatened salmon, is that a restoration project? No! How about this? Is granting a waiver to let the Forest Service granting a waiver to let Interfor log on sensitive soils during a heavy rain event after the logging season has stopped, is that restoration?
No! Hell no!
So what is this?
Desecration!
Bullshit! Right! Good job. So what this is the Forest Service doing business as usual using a different rhetoric. And this is something that Bark has seen time and again in the Forest Service, is they're trying to get out the cut, but call it restoration. And unfortunately, some environmental groups are falling for it. But Bark has not had the wool pulled over our eyes, because we've been out on the ground in Jazz. We spent about 800 hours out there now, ground truthing the entire thing. And not only have we gone to the forest before it's been logged, but we've been going to other timber sales after they were logged and seeing what Audie was saying. What it looks like is a mess. It's soup. There is runoff into the water. The soils are massively compacted. There are old growth trees getting logged that are not supposed to be logged, because no one is holding the Forest Service accountable. And when they say things like, oh, we're working with Interfor to increase variable density and horizontal diversity in the forest by taking over half of the trees.
Bullshit!
Thank you! No one but Bark is calling it what it is, which is profit-driven extraction on our public lands. Now, why Jazz? Why have we thrown all of our organizational resources to this farm to sale? Why are you all here for Jazz? Because it's a special area. Yeah, the Kallawash River watershed, right? Beautiful. Kallawash goes right into the Clackamas. There's several important things about the Clackamas. Can you name them?
Salmon!
Salmon, fish.
Drinking water!
Drinking water. Fish and drinking water, two big ones. Another one, what actually brings economy to rural Estacada? Recreation. Exactly. So the Clackamas is a drinking watershed for Westland, Lake Oswego, Oregon City, Estacada.
Shit, they're rich people. They can't do that.
Yeah, right? Now, what about the Portland watershed? Y'all ever been there?
Bull.
No, we can't even go hiking there. And yet, Coral, Lake Oswego, Westland, Oregon City have log trucks coming out of their drinking watershed all the time. They might be rich, but it's kind of a disparate impact. So there's water, there's threatened fish, there's recreation. There are a lot of things that we should be protecting the Kallawash for. And private, profit-driven extraction, masquerading as logging, is not one of them. All right. We are going to do a visual activity. Okay? So one of the big problems with Jazz is its impact to soils and the soil impact to water when it runs off. I'm going to give you an earful about this after we do our visual activity, because then you're going to get it. You're going to be like, oh right, I just saw what water plus dirt does. So, to do the visual activity, and everyone, do you have your cup of dirt?
Get your cup of dirt.
Get your cup of dirt. I'll just plug, this dirt is fresh organic dirt from Tryon Life Community Farm. Thank you very much, Farm, for supplying some dirt. This is what a landslide looks like.
They're gonna give you this bucket.
All right, everyone get your dirt.
More dirt.
Imagine you are a feller buncher. You are squashing the earth and making the dirt squeeze out. Imagine you are an earth flow. You have been bisected by a road. You are dumping the earth down on the ground. Has everyone put their dirt in? Everyone, oh wait, we've got some dirt to come. Ilona, get up with your dirt. Come on, more dirt. Okay, now what happens if you mix water with dirt?
Don't you want that coming through your water?
Yeah! More dirt!
So watch out for that strip there.
Landslide!
That happens a lot.
More rain, more rain. It's still raining. It's the Pacific Northwest. Go slow, Ray.
It'll be all right.
Plug in the culvert.
Got a blocked culvert.
Culvert. Oh, look at the Kallawash now. Oh no! literally with one machine, one person operating one machine, go in, grab the tree by its little claws, cut underneath, pick it up, limit, and put it down. All of that activity by one guy in a machine.
That way you don't have to create jobs either.
Exactly, not so many jobs for you by fellow bunchers. So that's the reference. That's what was logging up at the jazz site the other day. Fellow bunchers are forest bunchers. The soils aren't dry, that's a lie. Are you saying jazz is for restoration? Then it's time to get in for a vacation. We're talking a lot about soils. Soils are a huge issue up at Jazz for two main reasons. One, most of Jazz, over 1,000 acres of the timber sale, is designated high to moderate risk earth flows. Do people know what an earth flow is?
It's like moving earth.
It's a slow-moving glacier of soil. It's a big piece of soil that has movement. It's really cool to be out in earth flows because the trees are hummocky, the roads all crack up. The soil is alive and it's moving. And when you bisect it by roads and when you take the trees off, it moves even more. So Kallawash is the most geologically unstable watershed in the entire Mount Hood National Forest because of those earth flows. Not only is it unstable, it's been heavily impacted by past logging and roading. So there are some things in the forest plan to protect earth flows. One of the forest plan standards is that you shouldn't have more than 8% compaction in earth flows. Another one of the forest plan standards is that you should not have ground-based logging, i.e. using things like fellow bunchers and tractor skidders in earth flows.
Wow.
In the Jazz timber sale, the soil compaction in earth flow areas ranges from 9% to 30%. Remember 8% was the maximum? So we're already over the maximum, and the Forest Service admits that it will increase compaction by 2 to 6% in every single earth flow unit. That means in earth flow units that are already at 30%, which is almost triple the maximum allowed, it's going to increase it. It's just exempting itself from its forest plan standard with no rhyme or reason.
So they don't even follow their own rules.
Exactly. Remember we're suing them? That's one of the reasons. And because of all of those impacts, the impacts to water from the soils are much, much greater. These are but some of the things that we're looking at with Jazz. There are a lot of even more wonky legal issues. If you're curious, I invite you to talk to me because I like to do it, but you know, it's not for everyone. But that's why we're in federal court right now. And that's why we're challenging this right now. But courts aren't the only arbiter of the law. You know, public opinion is huge, and we need to tell Lisa Northrup, who was just instated as the forest supervisor 2 weeks ago, that this type of underhanded, not telling the public what's going on, letting them log out of season, and destroying the soils that they're sworn to protect is just, what did you say, Jen?
Bullshit!
That's right. That's what it is.
Right now we're going to call Kent Connaughton. He is the regional forester. He's been in the regional forester now for just over a year, I believe. And he is Lisa's boss.
Where is he right now?
Actually, I have no idea where he is, but he's in this building behind us. I have not been to the new building yet, so I don't even know what floor he's on, but I think he can hear us when we shout really loudly.
Can we practice shouting one more time? Ah!
Mr. K?
Hi, Mr. Connaughton, how are you? We have a message for you.
Stop logging jazz! 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 Stop logging jazz!
We did our second to last job. Good job, everyone. All right. So what's our last job today? When I left the BARC office, there were 296 emails that had been sent to the supervisor of Mount Hood National Forest. That's since yesterday when we sent out an email at 5 o'clock in the evening. We need at least 500 emails to Lisa Northrup by the end of today. Okay, here's what I want to do. One last round. 10 stop logging jazzes while these get handed out, and then we're going to break and we all need to go our separate ways and get our goal of 500 comments to Lisa. So here we go. Let's get started.
Stop logging jazz! 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 Stop logging jazz!
website, not only will you find what you need to take to make an email action, but you will also see the link to our Facebook action as well. We're going to be posting photos from today's action on there. Please spread it around, share it with your friends, make sure people know what's happening in our backyard. There may be more work to do in the next 2 weeks.
Well, we may not ever determine whether that is legal or illegal, what they did there, but there's a lot of people here in town that think that it's definitely unethical. And in fact, as Meredith was saying, they got so many emails, 500 emails, that they've taken down that connection on the website now. Isn't that what you were saying?
Right. So don't try to take action on our website because we disabled it after 559 emails.
In a couple of days.
Yeah, in about less than 48 hours.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what grassroots organizing is all
give
about.
Give them a break.
Because she was only on the job 2 weeks, you said.
Yeah, she's brand new to the job.
Well, maybe she'll go to her home and call this Little Beirut like the Bushes did years ago when they were here. So before we get calls, if we get calls, you wanted to get back into the roads of the area, which is is one of the main reasons why this is such a bad timber sale.
Sure. Yeah. Well. Like Brenna mentioned, Jazz is considered a restoration timber sale, and the Forest Service considers it restoration. We have a different opinion. And one of the most kind of absurd reasons for it to be considered restoration is that to access all of the vast area of this timber sale, they would need to reconstruct 12 miles of roads. And I say reconstruct because most of this road is, they're old roads, they were once roads. A lot of them have not been in active use for many years. If you go there, you really can't even tell there's a road on the landscape at all. And the forest is really reclaiming the road, and it's reincorporating back into the habitat of the landscape. And then in other cases, the Forest Service actually spent restoration money to remove the road and decommission it. They actively did work to decommission it from the landscape, but then they're saying, well, we need to get back in there and do some restoration work, so let's rebuild the roads that we already removed as a part of restoration work. So it's really kind of a backward logic there.
And that, they keep saying they don't have a whole lot of money to follow up on their timber sales and to do the job they need to do.
Yeah.
And then it's expensive to take those roads out.
Right. It is not a cheap endeavor.
Right. So they're kind of going against their own complaining there. They don't have money to do their job, and when they do their job, they're going to undo it.
Sure. Yeah. And BARC has worked with the Forest Service and has encouraged the Forest Service to do road decommissioning for years on Mount Hood, and we are always thrilled when they are taking the effort to actively remove a road from the landscape, because roads have some of the highest ecological impact, especially on watershed quality. They, like that river of mud that we created at the protest, that is what happens when an old road falls into a river, where a culvert gets blocked up and during a storm it blows out and an entire road can end up in your drinking watershed and in a stream that salmon relies on to build their nests.
I've seen the Clackamas look like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we are especially disappointed to see that not only are they willing to rebuild roads that are already overgrowing, but that they're willing to undo the time and effort that went into restoring that landscape years ago in decommissioning those roads. And we, like I said before, are also disheartened to see the amount of other infrastructure, landings and whatnot, and that all in all said, all of that basically totals over 100 acres of clear cut to do a restoration project. And I guess the point I think that is important that a lot of folks don't think about if you hear of a timber sale that's called restoration is that there's kind of an assumption that it's a really benign activity that is not really doing much harm to the landscape, but in reality there needs to be a more thorough investigation of, well, what are the real cumulative impacts of such a vast scale, and what are the impacts of logging over a forest that's already been logged, and what are the impacts of building 12 new miles of roads to see it happen.
Well, it's just like with that pipeline that they were wanting to put through, and it was a 47-mile clear cut or something, so wide, and a road is a linear clear cut.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know if folks maybe necessarily think about it in that respect, but that's what it ends up being, and it's the same with the landings.
Sure, yeah.
So it's kind of like so many things are like underneath the surface, between the lines of these environmental assessments or environmental impact statements. They're both the same thing. Just one was a little more deeper than the other, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So nothing going on with the phones yet. We can move along. I had some. We got to no more emails. The roads, that to me, we really haven't exhausted that, especially when you've got the Forest Service that are going in there, and for a couple decades now, forest activists have been saying we need to restore the forest. So what do? They just turn around and use that terminology,
right?
Rather than doing anything different, they just use that terminology. There's really nothing different they're doing to restore in a restoration project than it was what they were doing before.
Sure, and it's still right, and some people consider thinning as opposed to a clear cut as a really benign activity. But at the end of the day, it certainly still is commercial logging, and you still have heavy machinery on the landscape, creating that impact on the soil, and you still are impacting the habitat greatly. And if you go into a place that has been thinned and you see really what it looks like, I mean, I recommend everyone does that, because it really is. It is quite astounding. I've been into areas where it has been thinned, and there's invasive species that are waist high and all over the place, and it really does not look like a restored forest. Mm-hmm. It looks like a logged forest, and that's what it is.
Well, I think to me the main difference and it's always stressed on the bark hikes, which we should talk about that here in a little bit, is the difference in temperature in a forest that has been thinned, not even a clear cut. Obviously, it'll be a big difference, but just a thin forest, the difference in temperature and all that is incredible, and that affects the species. That affects the drying out affects everything within that forest, and I don't know. I know that the Forest Service doesn't spend any money following up on their timber sales, but Bark is starting to do that now.
Yeah, we've been doing post-logging monitoring. Traditionally, we always got out into the field before a timber sale is cut and provided comment based on what was in the forest while it was still intact. And now we've come to understand that it is also very important to get out there after it's been logged and see what it looks like. And one of the important things to monitor is what's happening with the soil, what's happening with the water. Those are really, really the key things that we're looking for out there. So when people mobilized last week to go check out the logging in Jazz early in the morning, what we were looking for was impacts to soil. Are there deep ruts from the machinery driving around the soil? Is there, mud flow and erosion into any running water that we could see? That sort of thing, because that is the reason why we have a lot of standards that prevent logging during wet weather, during the winter. So our post-logging monitoring has also been looking for something I mentioned before, the best management practices, or BMPs, to see if the Forest Service has been following the protocol that they establish for a logging project. And the protocol is put in place in order to protect water quality health. And we did kind of definitely a beginner's effort. There's a big learning curve to go out there and try to come up with a scientific protocol to accurately gauge the effects of logging. But we got out there and as best as we could, and after reading all the timber sale contracts and basically examined what are they doing, what rules are they following, and what rules are they not following. And oftentimes we found that they were not following all the rules. They were logging on slopes that were steeper than they should be, or there was invasive plants introduced into the area, ruts in the soil deeper than they should be, areas that should have been covered with slash to protect the soil that were not.
From heavy rains or whatever.
Yeah, and from machinery driving on it.
Oh, okay.
So they'll put slash down on the ground on top of the bare earth.
And there's plenty of that around.
Right, to lessen the impact of driving a heavy logging equipment over it. But yeah, we did find out that You know, in a lot of instances, the BMPs were not being followed, and then also when they were, if they were being followed, there was often evidence that they weren't effective because we found invasive species in the area, plants in the area, things like that, that indicated that they were not actually doing their job of keeping invasive plants out of a timber sale.
Mm-hmm. So where we are right now is they gave this Interfor, whatever.
Interfor.
Interfor, they gave them the okay to go ahead and log, but they've agreed not to at this point.
Yes, so we have gotten there was a voluntary agreement by Interfor that they would stop logging. And we continued to ask the Forest Service, and that we actually had arranged that shortly before our rally, so we were relieved. But the Forest Service had not agreed at that moment to not issue any further wet weather waivers. So we were continuing to demand that they do not issue further wet weather waivers. And actually earlier today, we got, let me see if I wrote down the wording on it, but basically we finally have an agreement between the Forest Service and Interfor that they will not be issuing any further permits to allow logging out of season. And we basically have an injunction that will prevent logging from happening until the 31st of March, and our lawsuit is scheduled to be heard before then. So we're relieved to hear that it will go before a judge and have it stay in court before logging could be permitted, if it is found to be legal.
So the 31st of March was when they raised the too wet to log. Well, it seemed to me that if it's obviously it's not that way, but if you're suing somebody and they're not, the judge has to make a decision whether this should go forward, there shouldn't be any logging.
Sure.
But I know that happens.
Yep.
So you have to go and then get a special injunction in order to stop it.
Yeah, more often than not. And like I said previously, we had made the decision to not try to get an injunction on logging because we assumed, well, logging season is over. Why will they be going ahead with it anyway? But we've learned from our mistakes. From now on, I guess we'll be trying to get an injunction.
Right. I think that's a good point. And that may be why they're backing off, because they know that this is just making them look bad, and it's going to end up maybe biting them in the butt in the long run. So, we've got 5 minutes left, no calls, so we'll just move along, and we'll kind of go full circle here. Like I was opened up with, none of the stuff we've been talking about is probably happening, maybe, say, in Mexico or Indonesia, or excuse me, the gal that was on last week, Danny, who talked about the deforestation in Indonesia that is destroying the habitat of the orangutan. Those folks don't have any recourse like this, and so so Bark has jumped on board and is doing this, and so you might talk a little bit about how people can get involved.
Yeah. Well, we like to go out into the forest. The best way to go learn about what Bark is doing is to get on a hike with us on the second Sunday of every month. We have a hike that's open to the public, and we go to an area of the forest that is going to be impacted or that we are otherwise focusing on in our work. So, for example, you might go on a hike to the Jazz Timber Sale with us sometime in January. I believe we might be planning a hike out there. And if you go on our December hike, we'll be exploring an area of the Fish Creek watershed and looking at some old roads out there and seeing how the forest has reclaimed them in old bridges. That would be pretty exciting. And if you like what you do, what you see out on a hike with us, you could always get involved as a ground truther. We need people to get out into the forest and basically get out there and play detective and see what's going on in a proposed timber sale or in a proposed project and help document it and help provide comment and feedback. And then the third thing you can do out in the field is post-logging work, getting out into an area that has been logged and taking measurements and using fancy tools to get readings and get
Yeah,
some
like
data for
checking
us.
soil compaction and things like
Yep,
that.
yep.
It was just something I just learned they could do.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And folks can call up, and if we've had the phone number and the website up, they can also just they can always support in many ways. Get on their email list. There's a action alert that goes out every month.
Yep, yep.
And there's usually quite a bit of good information on that. And I know BARC started out, like I said earlier, as a couple people up in the forest pissed off at the Forest Service for what they were doing in areas that, especially that the musician fellow, John, had spent a lot of time on, and he goes into these areas and they've been logged. And so there's so much that can be done in so many different ways. And we are up to what is it? You remember what is left of our old growth forest? Just a few percent.
Yeah,
and that's
not a
usually
lot.
high elevation. There's not a lot. People say they go out in the forest, they see all this green trees and all that. Well, a lot of that is just second growth, third growth. It's no longer a forest. It's just a collection of trees. And there are distinctions, and people can learn what these distinctions are. And go out on these hikes, and you mentioned it would go to timber sales, but there's also hikes, for other things as well.
Oh,
What are
yes.
some of those.
Yeah, well, we're not always looking at logged places. We like to look at just the ecology of the forest. We have a mushroom hike that's very popular in October,
Very
and we've been doing a hike to learn about looking for animal tracks in January as well. We've done that a couple years in a row. And if you go out and walk around on timber sale, it's not just like a depressing time in the forest where you're like, oh man, this is going to get cut. You find mushrooms, you see birds, you find beautiful little meadows, and maybe you'll find your favorite place in Mount Hood.
I see we get a phone call with a minute and a half left. We might put the phone call up. I'll give them 30 seconds. They waited almost too long. Call
Yes,
me,
I just turned on your program.
all right, you just about the end of the program, though.
Yeah, I know. I'd just like to know a little bit more about volunteering. I mean, who I contact and what number I contact them
All right,
on to find more about this, because I know you just have a few seconds.
All right, well, we put the graphic up right now, and you can copy the information down.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for calling. Well, great. Hopefully get that graphic up, but just in case, it's www.bark-out.org, and the 503-331-0374. Hopefully they'll get that
that's it.
graphic up. So
Yep.
that's 503-331-0374. Well, we're down to 40 seconds here. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
there's
thank you.
a lot of information there, and like we were saying in the beginning, people need to get involved, and you don't have to get really super involved in order to make a difference. So we got a sound bite.
Go out, get into the forest.
That's what it's going to take. If you're out there, it becomes personal to you, and you have to be out there to really have a feeling for it. So thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with something different. Good night.